has claimed more than 30,000 lives. Genocide
has said almost 30,000 Palestinians.
Than the 30,000 civilians.
Collective punishment of the Palestinian people, over 30,000.
Genocide, more than 30,000 Palestinians. Gazans are being collectively punished, and that is a war crime.
More than 30,000 Palestinians.
Genocide, 30,000.
30,000 people, over 29,000.
Genocide.
That gives you a flavour of the Scottish Parliament debate on ceasefire in Gaza. You can see the themes coming up there. I would say it's sort of on the anti-Israel side of the spectrum. Using the word genocide, that's very inflammatory, very anti-Israel. Collective punishment, again, that's on the anti-Israel side of the spectrum. 30,000 civilians, again, they tend to believe the data from an anti-Semitic jihadist death cult without question. Now, I think on the Israel-Palestine issue, Gaza question, there's a range of reasonable opinions. I would say the debate in the Scottish Parliament, in general, really pushed right to the anti-Israel side of the range of reasonable opinions, and in quite a few cases as well, I would say pushed beyond that. Now, the day before this debate in the Parliament, the Green MSP Ross Greer said this.
Victory to Palestine! Victory to humanity!
Now, in the world of Scottish politics, things are often upside down, as I'm sure you're aware. So Ross Greer, the blatant anti-Semite, well, that's fine. No controversy about that, particularly. But then when someone stands up a little bit on the Israel side of the debate, they've been branded anti-Semitic. Now, I know you think that makes no sense at all, but say this is Scottish politics, this is the Scottish Parliament, this is the Scottish media. So let's have a look at this story. Because what happened in the debate was that John Mason stood up and gave his little 4-minute speech. I would say it was more balanced than the other ones. He gave a few more points on the sort of pro-Israel side, but usually as usual in his very cautious and balanced way. So let's listen to what he had to say that's seen him branded as an anti-Semite.
Clearly, anti-Semitism is not the same as valid criticism of Israel. But neither are the two completely distinct and unconnected.
So yes, he's right there. Some criticism of Israel might be motivated by anti-Semitism. Again, that's a point sort of more on the pro-Israel side of the argument.
And according to the Bible, is the land which God gave his chosen people.
I mean, that could obviously be seen as pro-Zionist, pro-Israel, talking about the Jews as God's chosen people.
Now, having said that, it does not mean that we cannot criticise the Jews or Israel.
So saying you can criticise the Jews or Israel. Now, criticising Israel, okay, fine. Criticising the Jews, now that's where people have had a little bit of an issue. If someone criticised the Jews globally as a group, well, okay, you can sort of see that people might say, you know, that's not really the way you should speak. But think about that with other groups. If someone said, you know, the trouble with Christians, well, that probably isn't a fair thing to say, because there's lots of different Christians with different viewpoints and who act in different sort of ways. If someone said, you know, the trouble with Muslims, it might be a reasonable point in general, but it wouldn't apply to all Muslims. So it's maybe a sort of loose way to speak. If someone said, you know, the trouble with black people, now we might think, well, okay, you can't really generalise about a race like that. If someone said the trouble with black people in this country is that they tend to do this, well, there might be a reasonable point to make out of that. I mean, if someone said the trouble with white people, well, that's open season. I mean, you probably get a job as a professor in critical race theory at your local university. So talking about groups, it's a bit of a minefield. But I think what John Mason said, there's no way that can genuinely be interpreted as anti-Semitic.
God himself is hugely critical of his people in much of the scriptures.
I think religious Jews would certainly acknowledge that God's punishment on the Jewish people was part of their history.
So it is not anti-Semitic for some to say that the present Israeli offensive has been over the top and has possibly crossed the line from defence to revenge.
Entirely reasonable point. Again, you may agree or disagree with it, but it's not as anti-Israel as almost every other contribution to the debate.
To say that we must not sell arms to Israel, but that it is okay to sell arms to Saudi Arabia or others with a much worse human rights record is somewhat inconsistent.
Again, John Mason brings a bit of balance and saying something a bit more on the pro-Israel side of the debate.
It's very difficult to ascertain what all the facts are around what has been happening in Gaza. The number of deaths is one issue. Of the Palestinians killed, I gather that Hamas claims that 6,000 have been military, whereas Israel claims 12,000 were Hamas fighters. All such figures are very difficult to verify when both sides have a fairly unclear line between who is military and who is civilian.
John Mason was the only person to mention that. Again, bringing some more balance by saying something on the pro-Israel side of the debate.
It does seem that the number of civilian deaths in Gaza has been greater because Hamas deliberately built tunnels for military purposes underneath hospitals and residential areas.
Again, John Mason brings balance in the sort of pro-Israel side of the debate.
And on that point, where did all the resources come from for these tunnels? Perhaps the situation for ordinary people in Gaza would be better today if more resources had gone into civilian infrastructure rather than being diverted for military purposes.
Can anyone argue with that?
And I do think the United Nations, and particularly the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, have some responsibility in this regard. Going forward, I think we need a more neutral agency than UNRWA, helping the people of Gaza to rebuild.
Again, he's bringing balance to the debate on the pro-Israel side.
And we should remember that it is Iran and Hamas who openly declare that they want Israel wiped off the face of the map.
Now, that's a very important point, isn't it? I think it was entirely absent from the debate, apart from John Mason mentioning it. Again, that's a point on the pro-Israel side of the debate.
I was in London just after New Year and attended a Jewish synagogue one Friday evening. There were only about 15 to 20 people there, but they had to have 3 security guards on duty. What happens in Israel and Gaza does affect us here too, so let us all commit to being as even-handed as we can be and to seek to be peacemakers as much as we can be.
And he concludes by expressing his concern about the very real threat of anti-Semitism. So the reaction to that speech, lurid headlines accusing John Mason of being anti-Semitic. Now, when you read the articles, you can see what's really going on pretty quickly. A lot of the articles, they very quickly get onto John Mason opposes buffer zones around abortion clinics. John Mason took part in one of these vigils once. John Mason is pro-life. John Mason is anti-abortion. So they're sort of giving the game away. Basically, we don't like this fella because of his other views, so we're going to have a go at him over anything we can possibly find, even though we know that we're making something out of nothing and we're being totally unfair in what we're saying. But we've got no integrity, so we're going to say it in any case, because they're saying to us, this is just a game. It's just about trying to get the people we don't like. And we'll do it by any means we can, honest or dishonest. So let's go to the Scottish Conservative Party. Now, Jackson Carlaw, the Conservative MSP, gave a speech, and in his speech, he was, there was a bit more on the pro-Israel side of the debate in it, I would say. So the Conservative in the chamber was a bit more in line with what John Mason was saying. But the Conservatives as a party jumped on the bandwagon accusing John Mason of being anti-Semitic. So Scottish Tory MSP and party chairman Craig Hoy said, "This is an appalling anti-Semitic comment from an SNP MSP that has no place in a mainstream political party. John Mason's slur could not be more explicit or ignorant. He must apologise immediately for the gross offence he's caused, and Humza Yousaf must take action against his colleague." Now that is just naked political opportunism and demonstrating that the Scottish Conservative Party has got no integrity whatsoever. So who sprung to his defence? The Jewish Chronicle? No. They put the boot in as well, accusing him of being anti-Semitic. Has any other MSP stood up and said, whoa, this is not fair? John Mason's been accused of something here. I've heard his speech. He didn't say anything anti-Semitic. Someone could say that from any party. Another MSP from the SNP could say that. They could just do a post on X saying that. Another Conservative MSP could just say, no, actually, that's not fair. He didn't say anything anti-Semitic. Will they do that? No, absolutely not. So this is the deliberate targeting of John Mason because, according to some people, he's a bad person because he's, for example, pro-life. So they're willing to use any means to get him. And all the other MSPs are happy to sit by and let it happen. And they probably call that wisdom. But I call it cowardice. Right, thanks for watching. Do support the Scottish Family Party. We need your support. There's a link below. You can join us or become a regular donor from just £4 a month. Thanks for watching.